the PCAOB has made what I would consider positive statements about the status of Chinese domiciled companies that are listed under US exchanges. However, Marco Rubio seems to be upset at these developments. And so that's what I'm going to cover. So as you guys smash that like button, let me run that intro. What's up, guys? And let's get right into this one, because I know that a lot of you guys like to tune into this channel as it relates to those PCAOB audit related issues, because I'm probably the only finance YouTuber, or one of the very few finance YouTubers, who've actually gone through PCAOB audits in my career. And so let's dive right into this one, and I'll let you guys know sort of like what I'm thinking as we go through this article. So you can see here that US regulators have completed the inspection of US listed Chinese firms' audit records, and that's expected to reduce delisting risks. However, I just want to point out some stuff. So remember, on the channel, I've been saying for a year that they would figure it all out, and now it looks like it's pretty much done. I'll give you some examples of why there's still some more work to be done. But at the end of this video, I'm going to tell you guys, or I'm going to show you guys what a PCAOB audit really looks like. And so this is the first time in China's history that Beijing allowed audit records to be taken outside the mainland for inspection. And of course, you guys would recall that there's approximately 170 US listed Chinese firms that had forced the potential risk of being delisted. And so, of course, you know, once again, I never really believed that. And when it really came to the major guys, like, you know, an Alibaba, for example, which is a name that I do have an investment in, I just didn't believe that there'd be a chance that Alibaba would be delisted. I just think that a company like that would have gone through a strict audit from the beginning, and that's kind of like what we're seeing here. And I'm going to give you proof that the PCAOB, or I'm going to give you sort of like what I think is proof that the PCAOB essentially has told us that the Alibaba audit is completely fine through a read through. And so we'll get into that. And now, just diving into the article a little bit, you can see the US Public Company Accounting Oversight Board, or the PCAOB, was able to inspect the audit firms servicing mainland Chinese companies listed in the United States, which removed the delisting risk hanging over about 170 firms, which is great. And so what the PCAOB report said was that the mainland Chinese authorities did not prevent its inspectors from carrying out a thorough investigation of audit firms' working papers. And I would say that issues, if there were any, would have been noted by now. But there's a stronger statement later on, which I will show you guys in this video. And so here's what the PCAOB is saying, and they're just talking strong here. I don't know why, but they're just saying, I want to be clear, this is the beginning of our work to inspect and investigate firms in China, not the end. The PCAOB is continuing to demand complete access in mainland China and Hong Kong moving forward, said the PCAOB chair, Erica Williams. And so once again, I'm not sure what the point of talking tough here is. I think it's just the PCAOB just showing that they're completely impartial. They want to make sure that this process ends correctly. And, you know, the fact that we've had issues and we've come this far would probably suggest that the PCAOB has to be strong here, but this is probably one of the reasons why these stocks haven't reacted to this. Now, do I invest, or have I invested in Alibaba because I expected a sort of like a surge from a clean audit as a result of the PCAOB? No, I couldn't care less. In fact, I'd rather that the share price of Alibaba remains lower for longer. And so let it remain low into 2030 for all I care, because it just allows me to buy up more shares for cheaper as more funds come into the portfolio. But it also allows Alibaba to purchase shares or repurchase shares cheaper as well. And so it just makes a lot of sense, if you're a buyer of the security, that the security share price remains low. There's a lot of people who've invested in Alibaba who don't want that. They want to take that quick buck and run away with it. But as a long-term investor that looks at businesses from the perspective of a business owner, I do not care. I want the share prices to remain low. At the end of the day, you wouldn't care if you went to the mall and every day you went to the mall, there were sort of like Black Friday day sales, and that was all throughout the year. You would in fact prefer that. Why wouldn't you prefer Black Friday sales for security prices? And then just let the share prices increase as the value, or sort of like the earnings per share increases from two items, which is one, the company increasing its earnings per share naturally, and two, the earnings per share increasing because there's fewer shares outstanding. So I don't see a reason why I would want Alibaba shares to surge, especially considering that I'm not done purchasing the shares myself as part of my overall portfolio strategy. And now just going a little bit further into the article here. So the PCAOB, once again, they're being a little bit more strong here. So should the PRC authorities obstruct or otherwise fail to facilitate the PCAOB's access in any way and at any point in the future, the board will act immediately to consider the need to issue a new determination. So I think that's just like a grinchy statement. Like, it doesn't need to be said. I don't know why they're being so strong in their language, but it might just be the PCAOB doing PCAOB things. So Beijing, recall guys, has previously denied U.S. regulators access to financial statement audits of Chinese firms listed in the U.S., saying that those working papers contain state secrets. But recall, as we said in, I don't know, probably like December of last year, that they would come up with a deal, and they did, right? So a breakthrough deal was made in April when the CSRC scrapped that requirement. And of course, the PCAOB was allowed access to the working papers. Now, just diving into a little bit more on how this happened. So it looks like two teams of PCAOB inspectors spent around 7 weeks at the Hong Kong offices of PwC and KPMG going through the hundreds of audit working papers. And if you notice, guys, PwC is the audit firm for Alibaba. So just recall that. So if they don't have issues with at least these two audits, PwC and KPMG, but specifically with PwC, then Alibaba does not have issues. Now, notice this, once again, a strong statement. Today's announcement should not be misconstrued in any way as a clean bill of health for firms in mainland China and Hong Kong. Fine. Like, I just don't expect them to make a decision or sort of like make an announcement until all the audits are done. That's totally fine, but it doesn't mean that there isn't a read-through. And once again, I'm going to show it to you closer to in the next couple of slides where they actually give us a bit of a read-through as to why I believe that they think that the Alibaba audit, at least of the PwC working papers, went fine. And just moving on in the article, you can see that it is a recognition that for the first time in history, we were able to perform full and thorough inspections and investigations to root out potential problems and hold firms accountable to fix them. Now, here's where my thoughts are. I think that this is good because both countries, they sort of elevate their cooperation instead of like confronting each other and sort of being more hostile with one another. And so I like this. But look at Marco Rubio increasing the rhetoric here. So Senator Marco Rubio, the Florida Republican who sponsored the HFCAA. So if you guys don't remember, the HFCAA Act is the Holding Foreign Countries Accountable Act. And that's really what called on sort of like the PCAOB to push to audit the Chinese names. But the point that I would make is that if you're auditing the big four firms, I just don't think that these big four firms in China would have handed anything over to the PCAOB without first ensuring that the audit working papers were beyond fine. Recall, guys, that a PCAOB audit is about the audit of audit quality of auditors. And so the PCAOB is auditing the auditors. They're not redoing the audit. And so I just don't know what more you would expect, but Marco Rubio is upset. And now let's see what he has to say about this. So Marco Rubio says that the PCAOB selected two British affiliated auditing firms to review. And I would say like he does have a point. I think that every auditor in China of publicly listed companies in the US exchanges needs to be reviewed. Hands down, that needs to be what happens and needs to be what happens every year. But I'm under the understanding that exactly that is what's happening right now. But nevertheless, covering off PwC addresses the Alibaba risk. And so he's saying that while enactment of the HFCAA helped to force the CCP to the negotiating table and allow for a level of transparency, which is unprecedented, the PCAOB did not live up to the law. So he's taking shots at the PCAOB, which I don't think is fair. And so he said he's going to work with colleagues to ensure that this does happen. And notice that while he's saying that, the Chinese authorities have agreed to schedule inspections in 2023 and 2024, as well as any investigations that commence next year and beyond. So the Chinese authorities are working with the PCAOB and the PCAOB is working with the Chinese authorities. I just don't know why Marco Rubio is so angry right now. And just recall, guys, that PwC does audit Tencent. I know Tencent is not a regulated or a dual listed company, but you know, some of you guys are invested in Tencent. And so just notice that they are audited by PwC. And then, of course, you guys know that Alibaba is also audited by PwC. And so I'm really happy that they're covering off PwC in their review, at least at first. And I'm sure that they're going to cover everyone else off as well. And now here's the read through that I promised you guys. The US regulators said that its staff had preliminarily identified several potential deficiencies at firms subject to inspection that were consistent with the types and number of findings the PCAOB has encountered in the context of other first-time inspections around the world. So I think that's a long way of saying that documentation needs to improve, but it also is a long way of seeing, at least from a read through from myself, that if the only thing that you're seeing in the reporting on is that you're seeing similar issues that you would see from first time reviews of audit working papers from other auditors throughout the world, you're not suggesting that you're seeing fraud all over the world. Really what you're saying is that this is a documentation related issue, but I think fraud is very much off the table here. And like I said before, I just don't think that it's an issue, at least when it comes to Alibaba, but I could be wrong, right? But I just don't see any evidence for that, nor does it look like the PCAOB does as well. Otherwise, why wouldn't have they made it apparent right now? Or why would they have made that particular statement? They would have just not said anything. That's kind of the way I'm thinking about it, but I want to know how you guys are interpreting that statement in the comments below. And, you know, a couple of good points coming out of this is that the review process has proven to China that the US regulators had their eyes on audit quality only. So in other words, it's proven to the CCP that the PCAOB only did what the PCAOB should have done. They did not try to access sensitive information for political reasons. And this may pave way for mainland China to consider allowing the US inspectors to do the audit inspection every year. So that's very good news. Now, what I'm going to show you next is what a PCAOB audit would typically look like. And so the South China Morning Post printed sort of like a audit working paper. And I just want to show you what the PCAOB would be doing when they look at the audit working paper. So this is an example working paper and audit. So the first thing that I want you guys to notice how the PCAOB is not re-auditing the company, i.e. Alibaba. They're not going to Alibaba and asking for working papers and support and samples and all that stuff. They are just reviewing the audit working papers handed to them from audit companies like KPMG and PwC. So this is a audit quality assurance. In other words, auditing the auditors. Now, this particular procedure, and I know I have some auditors that watch this channel, you guys let me know what you think about my interpretation of this and if I got anything wrong, because it's been, I don't know, maybe over 10 years since I've been in audit. But recall, guys, this looks like a audit of controls because you can see the control summary. And so they describe, so here you got the control number and then you have the description. So the description here is a three-way match between the purchase order, invoice, and bill of lading. And really what this control really does is it helps the company recognize that nothing really should be booked in the accounts payable, at least, until the item that you're purchasing has been received. Prior to that, it would just be an accrual if you're going to book it at all. And accrual is an expense that we're likely going to have, whereas accounts payable is things that we absolutely do have to pay because, you know, we've sort of received it. So you just move it from the accrual to the payable. And so that's why you see that there's an accounts payable specialist that's in charge of this control. And, you know, when you first audit a control, the first thing you have to do is you have to understand the control. So this is the definition of the control. The second thing is you review the control with the owner of the control. And so that's what this documentation here is. And so Mike Miller, who's the auditor in this situation, met with Jane Smith, discussed the control, and they determined that the control is here. And so part of the control is that she does the three-way match, makes sure that the invoice, the bill of lading, and the purchase order are evidence before she signs off on it, on the purchase order, when her review is complete. And so he knows that this control exists. The next step is to actually test the control. And so what you'll do is you'll test certain attributes. So the first attribute is check that the quantity ordered matches across the three statements. So that's what the three-way match is. Check that the AP specialist signed off on the purchase order. I don't know why she wouldn't sign off on all of it, but it's just been a while for me since I've done this type of audit, but that's fine. And then obtain a system entry of the inventory receipt. So that's your sort of like analysis of the control. And then notice that he's got 3 samples that he tested. And of course, the first sample, everything went okay. The second sample, it looks like B, or testing attribute B, there was an issue with. That's why he put number 1, because that would relate to a note. So you can see the note is down here. And so it looks like the AP specialist may not necessarily have signed off on the purchase order. So let's go to the note. This sample was signed off by the AP supervisor because the AP specialist was on vacation. So that makes sense. So no exception noted. So you'd always conclude on it. And so you can see no exceptions noted there as well. Then you go to the third sample. Looks like there's something wrong with A. So what's A? Check that everything matches across the invoices. So quantity, invoice numbers, etc. So let's see what the issue was. The unit cost and cost of the purchase order did not agree with the invoice. I noted that the vendors was located in Canada, so definitely an FX issue. When I converted the invoice price to US dollars, it matched the purchase order, blah, blah, blah. So he provided a calculation on the invoice sample. So this is interesting that they even provided an invoice sample in the audit working papers. Generally, you don't. What you'll do is you'll just write it in here. You don't provide any invoice samples because it just gives a lot more ammo to the regulators or a lot more reasons for the regulators to write you up. And so you just provide documentation, or at least I wouldn't give them the invoices, but he did. No exceptions noted. They would probably go in and review the invoice since he provided to them anyways, but then they would determine, because he's providing it with the invoice, they could recreate or redo his audit, which is fine. And then, of course, he concludes that the control is operating effectively. So that's what the PCAOB would be doing when they review this audit working paper. But what they are not doing is that they are not going to Alibaba, coming up with controls analysis, coming up with audit assertion analysis. So that's just a control. When it comes to the lines on the financial statements, there's generally 3, but there's more than 3, but there's generally 3 management assertions that they go after. One of them is completeness, the other one is existence, and the other one is accuracy. So completeness of the information, so all the information has to be there. Existence, so if you're booking a revenue, it better be there. And so they'll test existence by making sure that, the revenue's hitting the bank or there's proper invoices, etc. And then accuracy. And so what they'll do is they'll pick a sample of whatever it is, either on the revenue side or the expense side, go right to the invoices or the bills of lading or whatever to make sure that the numbers tie to what's being booked into the financial statements. So those are 3 major assertions that they cover, and there's a lot of testing that happens. The PCAOB is doing none of that. They are relying on the auditors to make sure that happens. And so this is why I believe that there's going to be no audit issues. The PCAOB is not going to catch any fraud because the auditors of Alibaba, in this case PwC, would have scrubbed that audit to make damn sure that there was no situations of fraud. Otherwise, they would have pushed the audit back, or they would have resigned from the audit if they thought that the issue was pervasive. None of that has happened. I am confident that there's going to be nothing coming out of this. But once again, I'm a little bit biased because I am a shareholder of Alibaba. But even if I wasn't a shareholder of Alibaba, there's nothing here based on what I'm seeing and based on the experience that I have as an auditor who's gone through PCAOB audits that I can see. And so I'll leave it there, guys. Let me know what you guys think of this in the comments below. And guys, I just released a video today talking about how Apple is actually trying to move manufacturing away from China, which is something that we've been talking about on this channel for a while now. So it's interesting that we're now starting to see it. And so to get to that video, click right here.